Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host,
getting
Mike
started.
Schwartz, founder of Glue.
And
This
just
is
as we did
episode
this,
134.
oh,
We're live. Just a quick reminder before we start. So please follow the live stream to support us. You can do that on LinkedIn, and there's episode notes, and I'll just quickly show this link so that it's glue.co /IOH-134. So those are the notes. Our guests today are Subbu, an independent researcher in AI and machine learning, and Tobin South, head of MCP and AI agents at WorkOS and a research fellow at Stanford University. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
great to be here.
Sorry for the long intro. So before we dive into the topic today, which is about a new working group at OpenID Foundation, before we do that, let's actually just start with introductions because this is your first time on the live stream. Welcome. You're now officially Identirati. Subbu, why don't we start with you? How'd you get here?
Hi, everyone. For the first part of my career, which is mostly my undergrad, I sort of worked on early stage startups in the space of uh, rendering and architectural visualization, which has nothing to do with agents or security. And then after that, I ended up going to grad school at UMass. And for the last 2 years, I've moved to the Bay Area and have been mostly working on retrieval systems.
I see. Awesome. And Tobin, how'd you get here?
And thank you for the longer intro. Right as the call started, my cursor has decided to start building some package and lagged, but we're all good. Hi, everyone. I'm Tobin. I work at WorkOS, where we're very focused on building auth systems for MCP and staying on the frontier as that, and also run a research lab at Stanford called Loyal Agents, loyalagents.org, focused on agent security and safety. And all of this kind of came together after doing a PhD at MIT, where I worked on AI security more broadly. And part of the reason we're all connected here is Subbu and I are both on a OpenID Foundation community group, which was inspired in part by a very cool paper that Subbu wrote that I think we'll touch on soon.
And what's the name of that working group, actually? I fumbled the ball a little bit there. I wasn't sure what the name of the working group was.
It's one of those acronyms that I now only remember as an acronym. So it's the Artificial Intelligence Identity Management Community Group.
And what's the acronym?
AIIMCG.
Okay, nice. So let's start. This is a topic I haven't really dove in myself to this. I am maybe I'm kind of curmudgeon-y on this whole topic, and I just feel like there's so much work to be done. It won't be done by the time I don't know, people start doing stuff anyway. But let's just start with it sort of at a high level. In OpenID and OAuth, we have this concept of clients, which are applications that register. And I always think of clients as software. It's a piece of software. And that software has credentials and can prove its identity sometimes. But what's the difference between an AI agent and a typical application? And what extra claims might we need to know about an agent? Subbu, you want to start and take that one?
Yeah, sure. So from my perspective, it's pretty much similar, but it just has a bit of unique properties compared to the typical 2.0 stack of software, and uh, mainly because of the dynamic nature of agentic workflows or agents itself. And this sort of brings it in the space where an agent could sort of have not just one single model, or they can operate on multiple models, which is being language models, uh, and they use these multiple language models to perform subtasks or task and whole. So the main sort of attributes that we would sort of consider that we should recognize is what models it's using, what version of the model or what version of the agents it's using. Now with MCPs, what sort of MCPs it's using, so that we know the nature of the agent that's operating, similar to how we know what system an application is sort of when we integrate it with our existing systems, right? Like you can say Workday is a HR platform that is integrated to our system, so we are able to identify it much better and sort of know what sort of scopes are in terms of what Workday can perform and what it cannot perform.
Yeah, I'll echo that. And it's funny, Rohit's in the audience, who is a person who you can have an endless, fantastic debate about this with, as you can with many people, because agents and AI workloads are just software at the end of the day. But the way they operate is structurally very different in the heterogeneity of their actions, the large action space, if they're able to connect to arbitrary services and make quote unquote decisions on this kind of non-deterministic workflow, you end up hitting security boundaries that you wouldn't normally have to think about as much. And that is why it makes an interesting question from an infrastructure perspective.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. And maybe this is why it's an OpenID working group, but it sounds like you're just saying that there's some additional client metadata that we need to capture the let's say the relevant data that we need about this piece of software. But I want to go like a level deeper and ask about authentication of software. So in originally, if you go way back, we would manually provision a software piece of application. Like in SAML days, the administrator would say, "Oh, I have a new application. Let me provision it." And then we went to dynamic client registration, where we said, "Okay, this is slowing everybody down. Let's make an API where clients can say, here's my private key, my public key." And so we can do some type of challenge response to authenticate. And but it's automated through an API. So if you have a CI/CD, you can just create an ephemeral client sort of on the fly. And now we've sort of moved to maybe that's too heavyweight, and maybe we don't need a client at all. Maybe if I have an attestation from somebody that I trust, I could present that in lieu of client credentials. So what are your thoughts about how AI agents would authenticate themselves on this spectrum of that impacts trust, but also impacts scale? Subbu, you want to, or Tobin, you want to take this one?
You can get started.
So I think this is you're really hitting a really good technical question with respect to, you made a comment before that it sounds like we just need better client metadata. And I actually think it's a lot more than that. I do think we need better client metadata, especially when you move to a world of dynamic client registration, or something where you're not even necessarily fully registering your client, you're just kind of interacting. You do need really robust metadata to identify things. But I do think agents also demand more than just better metadata. On behalf of flows, delegated authority is a big thing when you have consumers using AI agents to operate on their behalf. There's questions around how these agents that are interacting with more traditional services like websites, where they're just scraping the website, how they present identity in a way that's more robust. I think there's a lot of cool questions in here. But to target just the dynamic client registration question, I do think it's really nice that we're moving to a world where agents can freely connect to systems, because they're going to operate at a scale that we don't really have the capacity to oversee as a human user. I don't know if any of that is useful for you, Sabri, but
I'll let Subbu respond before I dive in.
How I think about it is more like on the lines of, it's like there are going to be at least minimum of like 10 to 15 agents per user, and delegating tasks to agents and authorizing them in a manner that it if they're not general purpose, meaning one agent is not performing all the tasks, then it ends up being in a tricky situation, because I feel all these independent agents end up being independent clients, and that brings the challenge of how the delegation happened at the first place. Uh, was it just can we just address these delegations with just a bunch of metadata, or do we require some more oversee in the manner that, okay, this was initiated in a certain manner, or some sort of hardware level identification or something like that, right? So I feel uh, to a basic extent it does solve the issue of dynamic registration and sort of identifying itself, but it brings the challenges of uh, being replicated in X number of agents, and acting on behalf of you ends up creating more chaos than necessary. And I think that's the main problem.
Yeah, so I think so. Let's actually maybe. I know you guys want to go forward and talk about flows, like I heard on behalf of, and I could see how that would impact registration, because you need to make the claims that get ready for these delegations to support these delegations. But let me go back a step even further and just ask about the identifier for the agent. Um, now, for a long time, I've thought one of the missing things in OpenID Connect was an identifier for the RP.
Mhm.
It's clear that the OP, the OpenID provider, has a discovery URL or an issuer that's going to be unique, and we have a way to identify the OpenID provider. But the relying party, in a lot of traditional OAuth flows with dynamic client registration, they're assigned a client ID from the OP. There's been several efforts for the RP to be able to assert its identifier, like Spiff. Well, Spiffy. I'll get to Spiffy in a second. I see the comment from Ken. Um, so, but ideally, like, yeah, it'd be nice if we could say, "Here's my URI." IDP, just so you know, this is how I like to call myself. Here's this
Mhm.
nice URI, and that's good for being able to reference in audit logs also.
Mhm.
And Spiffy, in fact, might generate a URI that the
Mhm.
RP might use during dynamic client registration to present, and that's useful. I actually don't think that Spiffy there's anything other than Spiffy right now to generate that URI.
Hmm.
But how do you see what would you see as the best way to even identify these agents before we take the next step, which I dove into, which is about authenticating them? Any thoughts on how do we identify and what's the process for getting an identifier? Because without an identifier, do we really have an audit trail?
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
Tobin, you want to take a stab?
No, I was gonna let Sabu tackle it.
Super.
You
So,
wrote, OpenID connect identities for agents.
OIDC-A, the proposal that I wrote was in April, and I think now it's sort of come to a stage where it's slightly outdated, because there's so many things that has happened, and my thoughts about it has sort of evolved. I think the best way to identify an agent is based on the capabilities that it can sort of perform, rather than just including the other attributes that it has, like the model and uh, the system that it's operating under, or the environment that it's operating under. Uh, so I think uh, there should be some sort of an identifier which sort of includes the two level capabilities, along with the system that or the environment that it's operating in.
Yeah.
So maybe like a new Spiffy for agents,
Yes.
where Spiffy returns, let's say, and I'm not a Spiffy expert, but I think Spiffy returns like a certificate
Mhm.
and the identifiers in the SAN.
Mhm.
Um, and so are you proposing that an agent would basically register in some Spiffy-like way and get an identifier plus maybe some other metadata that it can present, like an attestation?
Yeah, that's a possible way is what I think. And this is again an evolving thing, right? Like, because every few weeks there is some sort of an update done to either MCP spec or a new framework comes around. So the basic infrastructure still remains the same, and I think which is a language model is trying to call a bunch of tools to access data in some manner and execute on behalf of it. So that being the core part, I think that makes much better sense than what OIDC-A was the initial proposal.
Yeah.
Tobin, any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah. So many thoughts on the identity for agents piece. I think this is actually like one of the bigger questions even to tackle, in part because not that we all need to agree on it, but it is going to be chaos when we inevitably don't agree on what identity for agents looks like. And there is lots of lessons from the decentralized identity community. There's the DIDs, there's the OpenID for VCs. There are many different ways you can do spiffy. It might end up being that we plug into IDP's vision of agents. So Azure has the agent ID stuff, which is just an application type. AWS Agent Core has the concept of an agent identity. And I'm increasingly seeing chaos emerge in what it means to provide an identity for an agent. Typically, it's just an application of a slightly different kind, but it might be interesting to work on this a little better, especially with tools like MCP, where we have an opportunity in a spec to really push for the right kind of client identity or client metadata information that is useful.
I'm going to ask, just to say, to go on the record here, do you think that identifier is a URI or a DID?
Oh, that's such a painful question. I'm going to go URI. I also think, well, so there's these interesting regulatory implications of identity for agents, which we don't really have for software workloads, where AI systems are, especially in contexts like the EU AI Act, very heavily regulated and have requirements around how you communicate that you're an AI agent, you communicate failure modes as an AI system and risks. I think it's Article 52 of the EU AI Act, which is still under interpretation. But it might be that there is a regulatory push for robust identities around AI, which could feed into how we design metadata for AI identities.
Can I ask a somewhat philosophical question here?
Please.
Let's see if we'll put you on the spot. A lot of these AI agents, I was speaking we had a live stream with Andor Kesselman last week on Thursday, and a lot of these agents aren't truly autonomous at all. There's a range from automation to autonomy, and actually autonomy is more maybe aspirational right now. So a lot of the times we're talking about just software that's performing some automation. What's your definition? What differentiates a piece of software from an AI agent? And then Tobin mentioned regulations about AI, and like, isn't this regulation just about software today? Like, what actually defines this as an AI agent versus just an API calling to get some data?
Yeah, Tobin.
Sure. I mean, so this debate shows up like at least once a week in my life, where someone's like, "So what is really an AI agent?"
Yeah.
And do you guys know the story of the legal case where the Supreme Court judge said they were trying to define a type of content? And they said, if you might know, it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And I think in general, when we talk about AI agents, it's currently specifically a workflow that involves an LLM in a non-deterministic way. If you're just using an AI model to categorize if this tweet is positive or negative, it's not really an AI agent. It's just an extension of a workflow with more cognition in there. When we talk about AI agents, my view is that they are significantly more flexible, and they can, compose a bunch of different tools in complex ways, and typically they have access to external tools. And everyone who is concerned about AI is concerned about the future of AI, or these kind of like highly composed multi-step tool use software workloads. But I agree, anything like that that's deployed now is overseen by a human. There's a human who clicked, run, put this on a cron job. And they are responsible when things go terribly wrong.
I actually want to allude to my favorite TV show recently, which is this. Apple has this TV series called Murderbot. It's a really great example of how some of the challenges around security. There's a lot of great metaphors. Eve Mailer pointed out the governance. So each robot which is walking around has what's called the governance unit, and that governance unit enables it to be centrally controlled. And Murderbot, in the first opening episode, you find out that Murderbot has hacked his governance unit, and now he's in control. So he's not centrally controlled anymore. He's truly autonomous. And so I guess what I'm wondering is so how do we don't seem ready to take that leap yet, though, in the real world, where we give true autonomy to robot or to any software processes. It just doesn't seem to be happening that much. Anyway, maybe I digress. We'll get back to Murderbot, I'm sure, in another example. So let's go back to okay. So I think I'm still wishy-washy on the identifier. It's some type of URI. We're not sure what that URI is going to look like. There'll be people who are going to lobby for DIDs, I'm sure. So let's move on to the next part, which is okay. So now I have my identifier, and I need some way to authenticate. We could have a hardware attestation. We could have a software attestation. I've been advocating for CEDAR over Rego because CEDAR is analyzable. So we can say we have this governance unit, and this governance unit has been analyzed to be non-hackable. And so maybe that attestation that you're using a certain type of software, or that software comes with a certain attestation for safeness. All those things can sort of flow into, you have to be able to assert those things. So where are we today with AI agents being able to prove sort of their provenance? Let's say I'm a workload running an Amazon infrastructure, and I have this governance unit, and I'm or these policies which are analyzable and provable, because it seems like AI generates all this hallucinations and all this stochastic sort of results, and we need to add some type of surety onto that, so we know we need predictability for security, so I can know what's going to happen. I don't want to or I need to check sort of the randomness of the generation of the AI by some real world guardrails.
Yeah.
Suba, why don't you take a stab at this one? How does an agent identify itself or authenticate itself once we have the identity, and how does it sort of assert the things that it's true about itself, like what kind of hardware it's running and software and policies it has?
I mean, I've been thinking about, even the OIDC sort of started with something on the lines of context-aware security. This was back in November, and how do we sort of figure out when a task is trying to be performed and the agent has to sort of say that I'm going to perform this particular task, how exactly do we say this is the right set of tools that it's calling, or is it even the right, because of the hallucination nature of the agent itself at the first place? So the first thing that I thought was maybe we should sort of take into account the task it's trying to perform, along with the the primary task of the agent itself, like when you're defining what the agent is supposed to do,
Mm.
and what the subtask or the task it's trying to perform at that given point of time. And this sort of brings in some sort of a behavioral understanding of the agent, and see uh, run it in a simulation for a couple of times with a bunch of, like, similar to evals, but run it and sort of create like a fingerprint, and use that as some way of uh, an identifier, attestation maybe. uh, I think that sort of would sort of bring in a little more uh, emphasis to representing the agent itself, and sort of validating this the right agent, and sort of could create these audit trails that could sort of be uh, represented in a way that if it's going wrong, then okay, now we can sort of, you know uh, put a brakes to what the agent is doing, rather than sort of comes with the zero trust principles, where uh, you can sort of evaluate it much better because of the dynamic nature of the agent, compared to uh, the 2.0 software stack, which didn't really have that issue at the first place.
We're going to need more data about the agent
Yeah.
to know the level of trust we can put in it.
Yeah.
You know, Tobin, thoughts on this issue? Is like, how do we? Okay, so let's assume we can identify it. Now, how do we go to the next step, and how do we establish trust and be
Yeah,
able to re-identify it or authenticate it?
yeah, many problems here that need to be solved. So many problems. So I think we should totally return to Murderbot when we talk about authorization. But so there is a whole industry forming around guardrails for AI agents or AI systems more broadly.
And they're mostly
reliability.
MCP proxies, by the way.
And it's control. I often talk about there's two touch points where you can intervene on an AI system. You can either intervene in the vibes, or you can intervene in the system. And
Mhm.
anyone trying to do guardrails or reliability or evaluations, tons of work on that. That's all interacting with the vibes. You want to make sure the vibes of your AI system don't go wrong, that the text isn't generating the wrong ideas. And this is very, very hard to do. And any attempt to kind of control that and then create attestations about that, or any kind of guarantee, is just a losing battle. Even my friends who I have some good friends who just did a startup that I'll plug, tinfoil.sh, which is a confidential computing startup that will give you attestations straight out of the GPU on inference. This is amazing for confidentiality and gives you verifiability. But at the end of the day, it's still a non-deterministic AI workload. And really, the only place where we do have reliable, robust tooling that we know isn't going to go completely haywire because of some arbitrary AI decision is authorization, and as part of that, authentication. That the reason I think we all care about identity and permission management for AI systems is because it's the last part of the workload where we can actually make sure security is done correctly. I don't know if that answers your original question, but this is why I think this is a really interesting part, and getting real attestations out of the rest of it is hard.
Are you suggesting that we don't, we cannot consider the behavioral nature of the agent as part of authorization, or are you considering it as a very separate entity altogether?
So I do think there's a bunch of work. Alan Chan has written some work on IDs for AI systems and is working on some regulatory stuff, especially in the UK, which is all about communicating properties and failure modes and evaluations of AI systems in their identity or in client metadata, to communicate up front those failure modes and be able to audit them. But in general, I lean towards not including that information, at least not in the authorization part of the flow, keeping that kind of fixed.
You're sort of jumping ahead a little. I'm trying to go like identifier, authentication, authorization, and you're jumping. Well, we'll just go with that though.
But it's all intermixed.
We're about 15 minutes left, so it's fine. And there's a lot of hard challenges in authorization, and I think that we have an interdomain world where we have an agent that's perhaps calling resources from different domains, so it's not all within your domain. So there's interdomain trust issues. There's delegation issues. So just if we think about an authorization request, there's input to this request. Based on this, I want this decision. And it seems like the input to the capability is going to be tokens. And the tokens will be from multiple domains. Maybe you have an authenticator attestation from the FIDO Alliance. Maybe you have a platform attestation from Google about whether the app, the checksum of the app is the same and whether the device has been rooted. You might have IDP tokens that assert identity of a person, and you might have perhaps other tokens, transaction tokens, or access tokens that represent machine software identity. So you have all these inputs into the authorization, and it seems like one of the challenges is that we have is that even if we could agree on the contents of those inputs, like what those tokens look like, if we just say all the token stuff's figured out, we have perfect tokens, we have no real way to express policies about those tokens today. That's agreed upon. So could you guys talk about maybe some of the challenges we have, even if we had perfect tokens, which we don't? How would we even make these policies? And where would those policies get executed? In the agents or in the cloud? Who wants to volunteer for that one first?
I'll throw in maybe a quick note, which is, I think there are lots of unanswered questions about where that policy decision point should be, where enforcement should happen on that, and even there are contexts where when AI agents are spinning up sub-agents or trying to orchestrate other workflows, you get really tricky questions of, if you spin up a sub-agent because you want some coding workflow to be done, you're coding, you have your AI writing a bunch of stuff, it needs a subtask done to provision some Terraform, and it wants to create a sub-agent, which is good for context management, it's considered best practice. Now, suddenly, you probably want to give that sub-agent least privilege, but what exactly does that mean? And how you do this in an autonomous way? And where is the enforcement point of these policies across this kind of stack of like nonsense that's being done? And I really think there is no correct gold standard way of this being done yet, and everyone's just kind of making it up as they go along.
Not only is there no gold standard way, there's no way right now. Sivu, you have any thoughts on this? What are people? Because most of the things people talk about come down to, why can't I authorize this thing properly?
Yep.
Where are we today with authorization? And even if we had perfect tokens, could we make the policies we want to make?
I mean, that's. I think it's pretty hard to enforce, at least at this point of time, especially with how it's the whole agentic space being evolving in a manner that I think we're not able to keep up with the day-to-day sort of updates that's coming forth, and sort of new challenges that each of them present in its own unique way, and sort of we don't know how to consolidate or where to consolidate at the first place, rather than like knowing how we can even do it at the first place, because I think it would take a little bit more time to like start figuring out how the consolidation process, and maybe that's sort of when we would start to sort of envision uh, the existing way being adopted to the new form of policy enforcement, or maybe there's or a new way altogether, right? Like at this point, I would say I don't know.
It's
Uh,
a mess.
yeah, and hopefully we all of us put together, come together to like form some sort of consensus over where it should be and how it should be done.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be very tricky.
The one
So
thing I do know,
go ahead, Tobin.
the
Yeah.
one thing I do know is intervening on language models is hard. It's
Uh-huh.
very painful. It's expensive and it's confusing. And to do it really well, you've got to hire someone who costs too much money. Whereas protecting resources and doing an enforcement point, like when can an AI agent or any kind of workflow access what resources and under what conditions, is infinitely easier than trying to ensure that AI models don't think incorrectly.
So putting the guardrails on is better than trying to make AI perfect. I think that's the point, is that we know that AI is going to try and overstep what it's going to hack its governance module and try and do too much. I want to pivot to the sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just to riff on that a little bit. For those who haven't used the coding agents, you really see this. So in most cases, you give them access to command line tools, and
Yeah.
Claude on my laptop will regularly spin up something on a port, be like, oh, it's not on the right port. I thought it'd be on port 3000. Let me just p-kill whatever process is using that port so I can have the port I want. And this goes from all the way from external remote resources and protecting them to just local environments that need to be protected from coding agents. It's a big problem.
Interesting.
I mean, to second that, like
Sure.
the remote MCPs are altogether huge, like bigger challenge compared to even local ones, right? Like there's no control over that in any way, and then because of the dynamic registration of MCPs and the tool discovery, it becomes like a whole all like a new challenge altogether, because now like at this minute it could be using like 5 tools from an X MCP, and they upgrade the MCP. Now there are like 10 new tools that's the agent start discovering and start using it, unless you have like sort of flagged it like, or you only use these particular set of tools, which is a problem of its own. uh, yeah, so it's changing so dynamically, and I think there was a recent proposal about even putting authorization at the MCP level and not at the agent level. So yeah, the spec itself is changing on a daily basis.
Okay, so that's a good lead into where I wanted to go, because we have just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to talk about the OpenID Foundation working group, because I think of successful OpenID working groups like OpenID Connect, the AB group, the Artifact Binding group. They were successful because they sort of standardized what people were already doing. Like Facebook Connect had a thing and Google Connect had a thing, so they just sort of aligned on the same thing. Plus, there was years of precedent of how this was handled with SAML. So something like OpenID Connect really formalized a new approach where there's already vast overlap. But in this case, it looks like you guys are sort of striking into new territory, trying to anticipate what's needed, design better solutions. This is a vast scope. How do you narrow that scope to figure out what would be effective for a working group to do, and what you think could actually get adoption? Because without it, there's so many specs that never get adoption. They say adoption's more important than anything else.
Yeah.
So how are you scoping the work of the working group to try and make it effective?
Yeah. So I'll make a nod towards that. I'm co-chairing the group with Atul and Jeff. And part of the reason Sabu and I were brought into this community is being future looking and writing pieces, thinking about what this could look like as a design earlier this year and late last year. And yet where I feel the group is going and where the kind of standards communities are going is that AI is moving so fast that folks are just building stuff. Right. So the large identity providers have their opinions of what this looks like. MCP spec continues to evolve in specific ways, which enforces certain paradigms. And there are lots of different interests trying to design different solutions here. And really the role of something like the OpenID Foundations group is to monitor this, to find the common patterns, to communicate that out widely. And then as standards emerge, as consistent patterns emerge, think about how to put these into kind of more robust written down standards. I don't think we're really pushing as a group to insist on a specific future in so much as we're watching it unfold in front of our eyes.
Yeah. Subu, any thoughts on scope? On what would you like to see the working group actually address in the next year or so?
Some sort of
The working group member.
toward how exactly do we go about things as a whole, because at this point everyone's sort of going at it with their own set of approaches and sort of trying to safeguard agents, and it's gone the adoption towards AI agent is sort of increasing drastically over by the day, and we sort of have to like come together as fast as possible to like sort of put in some sort of frameworks, at least the initial frameworks and the initial taxonomy, so that everybody can agree on and start working towards. Uh, in some way, the language could be easier to understand, because if you ask one person what an AI agent is, you'll get one answer, and if you do it with another, you'll get an entirely different answer. And that, I think that's the primary thing with OIDC, is that they're uh, trying to get this and sort of create taxonomy and few other things, so that people can speak the same language in the first place.
Nice. Well, I think we're coming up on the end. Should we go into last thoughts? Tobin, last thoughts? Could do you first.
Yeah. So we are at a genuinely really exciting time as people are building out AI agents. AI agents has been a topic that everyone's talked about for nearly 2 years now. And now I really see a lot of developers building it, especially in my day job at WorkOS, where I'm helping builders with it. And it is a good time to build solutions that are secure and scalable and will eventually sell into the enterprise. So if you are building AI agents, or if you're building MCP and you'd love someone to help talk through that process and make it secure, add auth, make it scalable, it's all I do all day, every day. So I'd love folks to reach out.
Nice. And Subu?
Yeah, I would say we need more people coming in, talking about the problems that they're facing, uh, the way they're deploying agents, uh, and think about not just about today, but think about 6 months down the line how it's going to evolve, rather than just about uh, how it is today and trying to address problems of today. Yes, that is as important as it is, but I think it's way more important to sort of see where it's going and how it's going to evolve into this new industry that we think software 3.0 will be. Yeah, that's uh, my calling for everyone to work on this.
So we got into 3 of 12 questions that I generated, so not bad. I just want to announce next episode is Cedar Analysis Tools with 2 Amazon engineers who are working on tools that allow you to take a Cedar schema and set of policies and run analysis on it, because Cedar is analyzable. So looking forward to that. And with that, unfortunately, we have to cut it short. So I'll thank the audience and thank my guests, and we'll see you next time.
Amazing. It's been a pleasure chatting with everyone. Good to see you all.